The fluorescent lights of Pacific General Hospital cast their familiar harsh glow across the break room as Dr. Marcus Chun adjusted his pristine white coat, the embroidered lettering reading Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery gleaming like a badge of honor. He glanced at his Rolex, a gift he had bought himself after his last successful heart transplant, and frowned at the sight of his wife, Elena, quietly arranging coffee cups and pastries on the corner table. Elena moved with practiced efficiency, her movements deliberate and calm as she prepared the morning refreshments for the medical staff. Her simple navy dress and comfortable flats marked her as distinctly different from the doctors and nurses who would soon flood the room between surgeries. She had been doing this volunteer work for 3 years now, Marcus often reminded colleagues, though he failed to mention it was unpaid service she had insisted on providing. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the head of emergency medicine, entered the break room with her usual brisk pace. She nodded politely to Elena before approaching Marcus. "Dr. Chun, I wanted to discuss the Rodriguez case with you. The patient response has been remarkable since the procedure." Marcus straightened, his chest swelling with the familiar warmth of professional recognition. He had spent 15 years building his reputation as one of the most skilled cardiac surgeons on the West Coast, and moments like these reminded him why he deserved every accolade. "The technique I used was quite innovative," he replied, his voice carrying the confident tone that had become his trademark in medical circles. Elena continued her quiet work, checking her phone briefly before returning her attention to arranging the refreshment station. The gesture was subtle, but Marcus caught it from the corner of his eye. Always playing with that phone, he thought to himself, probably scrolling through social media or checking recipes like most housewives do with their free time. As more medical staff filtered into the break room, the conversation naturally turned to the upcoming hospital fundraising gala. Dr. Jennifer Liu, the chief of pediatrics, mentioned the impressive donor list they had assembled for the event. Marcus seized the opportunity to establish his importance in the room. "My practice has been one of the top contributors for 5 consecutive years," he announced, making sure his voice carried to every corner of the break room. Elena looked up from her work for a moment, her dark eyes meeting Marcus's briefly before she returned to her task. There was something in her expression, a fleeting look that might have been amusement or perhaps resignation, but it passed so quickly that Marcus dismissed it entirely. Dr. James Morrison, a younger surgeon who had recently joined the hospital staff, gestured toward Elena with obvious respect. "Mrs. Chun, thank you again for organizing these morning refreshments. It really makes a difference having something nice to look forward to between surgeries." Marcus waved his hand dismissively, though his smile remained fixed in place. "Oh, Elena enjoys keeping busy with little projects like this. It gives her something to do while I handle the real work of saving lives." The comment drew a few uncomfortable chuckles from the assembled medical professionals, though several exchanged glances that suggested they found his dismissiveness inappropriate. Elena's response was characteristically gentle. "I find it fulfilling to support the incredible work everyone does here," she said simply, her voice carrying a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with Marcus's boastful tone. Her phone buzzed again, and she glanced at it with what appeared to be practiced discretion. The morning continued with Marcus holding court among his colleagues, regaling them with stories of his latest surgical successes and the accolades he had received from various medical journals. He spoke with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted his own importance, punctuating his stories with gestures that displayed his expensive watch and perfectly manicured hands. Meanwhile, Elena finished her work with the refreshment station and began organizing some papers she had brought with her. To the casual observer, they appeared to be simple administrative documents, perhaps household bills or appointment schedules. Marcus had long ago stopped paying attention to what he considered Elena's trivial paperwork, assuming it was related to managing their home or planning social events. As the medical staff began filtering out to begin their shifts, Dr. Walsh approached Elena directly. "Mrs. Chun, I hope you know how much we appreciate everything you do here. Your contributions to this hospital go far beyond these refreshment services." Elena smiled warmly, though there was something enigmatic in her expression. "I believe in supporting important work, Dr. Walsh. Sometimes the most valuable contributions happen behind the scenes, where people might not notice them immediately." Marcus, overhearing this exchange, felt compelled to interject. Elena has always been good at supporting roles, he said with a patronizing chuckle. She understands her limitations and works within them. That is definitely something I have always valued about our relationship. The break room had mostly emptied by now, leaving Marcus, Elena, and Dr. Walsh. The emergency medicine chief looked distinctly uncomfortable with Marcus's comments, but Elena maintained her composed demeanor. She gathered her papers carefully, sliding them into a leather portfolio that looked surprisingly expensive for someone Marcus often characterized as financially dependent. Dr. Walsh excused herself, leaving the couple alone in the break room. Marcus was already mentally preparing for his first surgery of the day when Elena spoke in a tone he rarely heard from her. "Marcus, we need to discuss something important when you have time. I received some papers yesterday that require your attention." He barely looked up from his surgical schedule. "Whatever it is, Elena, it can wait. I have 3 major procedures today, including a high-risk valve replacement that could determine whether a 60-year-old father of 4 lives or dies. Your household administrative issues are not exactly urgent in comparison." Elena nodded slowly, though something in her posture suggested she was not as accepting of his dismissal as she appeared. "Of course," she replied quietly. "I understand your priorities. We can discuss it this evening when you return home." As they prepared to leave the break room, Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of a man who believed his life was perfectly ordered. His career was thriving, his reputation was solid, and his personal life was manageable precisely because Elena understood her place in it. She handled the domestic responsibilities that allowed him to focus on his important work, and she did so without complaint or unreasonable demands. Elena walked slightly behind him as they left the hospital, her leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She moved with the same quiet efficiency she had displayed all morning, though there was something about her bearing that suggested a person accustomed to carrying more responsibility than appearances might indicate. Marcus climbed into his Mercedes sedan, already thinking about the complex surgery awaiting him. Through the windshield, he watched Elena get into her modest Honda Civic, the same car she had been driving for 5 years despite his suggestions that she might prefer something more suitable for a surgeon's wife. He had never pressed the issue, assuming that Elena preferred the practical choice that matched her simple tastes and limited understanding of status symbols. What Marcus did not know, as he drove toward his next surgery, was that the papers in Elena's portfolio contained documents that would soon transform everything he believed about their marriage, their finances, and the carefully constructed world where he saw himself as the sole provider and decision-maker. The irony was that while Marcus spent his days literally holding human hearts in his skilled hands, he had somehow failed to recognize the true nature of the woman who had been quietly managing far more complex responsibilities than he could have imagined. But that realization was still hours away, and for now, Dr. Marcus Chun remained blissfully confident in his assumptions about Elena's limitations and his own indispensable importance. As Elena drove through the morning traffic, her phone rang with an incoming call from someone Marcus would have been very surprised to meet. She answered with the crisp professional tone of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected millions of dollars, though that conversation would remain as invisible to Marcus as all the others had been for the past 8 years of their marriage. The mahogany conference table in the offices of Blackstone, Pierce & Associates reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown San Francisco. Marcus Chun sat across from his divorce attorney, William Blackstone, feeling the familiar confidence that came from being in control of a situation. He had chosen Blackstone specifically for his reputation as a ruthless litigator who specialized in protecting high-net-worth individuals during marital disputes. Blackstone reviewed the initial financial disclosures with the practiced eye of someone who had handled hundreds of similar cases. "Dr. Chun, based on these preliminary documents, this should be a fairly straightforward division of assets. Your medical practice generates approximately $800,000 annually. You have the house in Pacific Heights valued at $2.4 million, and your investment portfolio shows roughly $1.7 million in traditional retirement accounts." Marcus nodded with satisfaction, adjusting his silk tie as he prepared to discuss his soon-to-be ex-wife. "What makes this particularly simple, Mr. Blackstone, is that Elena has never contributed financially to our marriage. She has never held a paying job during our 8 years together. She volunteers at the hospital, plays around with some computer hobby projects at home, but essentially, she has been completely dependent on my income. The attorney made notes on his legal pad, though something in his expression suggested he found Marcus's characterization worth exploring further. When you say hobby projects, Dr. Chun, can you be more specific about what your wife does with her time? Marcus laughed dismissively, the sound echoing off the polished walls of the conference room. She sits at her computer for hours, claiming to be working on spreadsheets and making phone calls. I think she enjoys pretending to be businesslike, but it is really just elaborate time wasting. Sometimes she talks about investments and market analysis, but it is clear she does not understand these concepts beyond what she might read in magazine articles. Blackstone continued taking notes, though he paused when Marcus mentioned Elena's financial discussions. Has she ever mentioned specific investment vehicles or shown you documentation of any financial activities? Not seriously. No, Marcus replied with growing confidence. She occasionally shows me printouts of what she calls her research, but it is obviously amateur hour. She gets excited about technology companies and cryptocurrency trends, the kind of surface-level stuff that housewives with too much time get fascinated by after watching financial news programs. The attorney reviewed Elena's financial disclosure forms again, his brow furrowing slightly. Dr. Chun, I noticed that your wife listed several assets on her preliminary filing that seem inconsistent with your description. She has claimed ownership of various investment accounts and business interests. Do you have any knowledge of these? Marcus waved his hand dismissively. Elena probably included our joint savings account, and maybe some small investments I made years ago, but put in her name for tax purposes. She has this tendency to overcomplicate simple financial matters. Trust me, Mr. Blackstone, after 8 years of marriage, I know exactly what my wife is and is not capable of understanding. Meanwhile, across town in their Pacific Heights home, Elena sat in her home office, a converted bedroom that Marcus had long ago dismissed as her craft room where she played with her computer hobbies. The space was meticulously organized, with multiple monitors displaying real-time financial data, market analysis charts, and communication platforms that connected her to trading floors and venture capital firms around the world. Elena was concluding a conference call with a group of investors in Singapore when her assistant, David Park, knocked softly on her door. Mrs. Chun, the Tesla documentation you requested is ready for your review. The merger analysis shows the projected returns are exceeding our initial estimates by approximately 37%. Elena thanked David and turned her attention to the financial reports spread across her desk. These were not the simple household budgets that Marcus imagined when he heard her discussing numbers on the phone. Instead, they represented a complex portfolio of technology investments, real estate holdings, and venture capital positions that she had been building systematically for over a decade. Her phone rang with a call from Jonathan Hayes, the managing partner of a prominent Silicon Valley investment firm. Elena, we have had 3 more inquiries about your availability for board positions. Your track record with emerging technology companies has generated significant interest in the venture capital community. Elena responded with the confident authority of someone accustomed to making million-dollar decisions. Jonathan, I appreciate the opportunities, but I want to remain selective about my commitments. I prefer to focus on companies where I can contribute meaningful strategic value rather than simply lending my name to their board. She had been having similar conversations for years, though Marcus remained completely unaware of her professional reputation in investment circles. To him, her phone calls were mysterious chatter about topics he assumed she barely understood. He had never bothered to listen closely enough to recognize the sophisticated financial language she used or the deference with which established investors spoke to her. That evening, Marcus returned home from the hospital to find Elena working at her computer, surrounded by what appeared to be complex financial documents. The multiple screens displayed charts and graphs that looked impressively professional, though Marcus assumed they were probably generated by some consumer financial software designed to make amateur investors feel sophisticated. Still playing with your spreadsheets, Elena? He asked with the patronizing tone that had become habitual when addressing her work. I hope you are not getting too stressed about managing our household budget. The divorce proceedings should not require you to worry about these kinds of financial details. Elena looked up from her monitors, her expression remaining calm despite the dismissive nature of his comment. Actually, Marcus, I was hoping we could discuss those papers I mentioned this morning. I think you would benefit from understanding the full scope of our financial situation before we proceed with the legal proceedings. Marcus loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of wine, already mentally dismissing whatever Elena wanted to show him. Sweetheart, I have spent the day making life-and-death decisions in operating rooms. I really do not have the energy to review household paperwork or listen to your theories about investment strategies. Whatever you think you have discovered, I assure you that my attorney and I have everything under control. Elena nodded slowly, though there was something in her posture that suggested she was not as easily dismissed as Marcus believed. Of course, she replied quietly. I understand that your work is demanding. Perhaps tomorrow would be a better time for this conversation. As Marcus headed upstairs to change clothes, Elena returned her attention to her computer screens. She was in the middle of reviewing acquisition proposals for 2 biotech startups when her secure line rang with a call from Switzerland. The conversation that followed involved complex discussions of international currency hedging and emerging market opportunities, the kind of sophisticated financial planning that would have surprised Marcus if he had bothered to listen. You know, Elena said to her caller, I have always found it interesting how people make assumptions about others based on limited information. Sometimes the most significant work happens in places where others are not paying attention. This observation was particularly relevant because Marcus had never bothered to investigate the source of their comfortable lifestyle beyond his medical practice income. He assumed that his salary as a cardiac surgeon naturally provided for their Pacific Heights home, Elena's volunteer work, and their generally comfortable standard of living. What he had never considered was that his income alone could not support the level of financial security they actually enjoyed. Elena had been carefully managing this misconception for years, allowing Marcus to believe that his professional success was the foundation of their wealth, while she quietly built and maintained a financial empire that dwarfed his surgical earnings. She had done this not out of deception, but because Marcus had never shown genuine interest in understanding her work beyond his surface-level dismissals of her computer time. Now, as divorce proceedings loomed, Elena faced the interesting challenge of revealing the true nature of their financial partnership to someone who had spent 8 years assuming she was essentially his financial dependent. She wondered how Marcus would react when he learned that his confident characterizations to his attorney were not merely wrong, but spectacularly backwards. As viewers watching this unfold, many of you probably recognize the feeling of being underestimated or dismissed by someone who should know better. Whether you are watching from New York, Los Angeles, or anywhere else around the world, you have likely encountered people who make assumptions about your capabilities based on limited information. Feel free to share in the comments where you are watching from, and whether you have ever experienced this kind of professional or personal dismissal. The irony of Marcus's situation was becoming increasingly apparent to everyone except Marcus himself. While he spent his days literally repairing hearts with surgical precision, he had somehow failed to recognize that the woman sharing his life possessed skills that were far more complex and valuable than his own. But that realization was still days away, and for now, Dr. Marcus Chun remained supremely confident in his understanding of Elena's limitations and his own indispensable importance to their relationship. Elena continued her work late into the evening, managing investment portfolios and strategic decisions that would soon become very relevant to the divorce proceedings. Her calm demeanor and methodical approach to complex problems had served her well in both her professional life and her marriage, though only one of those relationships was about to be permanently altered by the truth. The Superior Court of San Francisco buzzed with the quiet intensity that marked high-stakes divorce proceedings. Judge Patricia Reyes, a woman known for her meticulous attention to detail and intolerance for theatrical posturing, reviewed the case files spread before her bench. The courtroom's traditional oak paneling and formal atmosphere provided the perfect setting for what promised to be a complex division of marital assets. Marcus Chun sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney William Blackstone, his posture radiating the same confidence he displayed in hospital conference rooms when discussing surgical procedures. He had chosen his best navy suit for the occasion, the one that Elena had selected for him during a shopping trip years earlier, though he had long since forgotten that detail. To Marcus, this legal proceeding was simply another professional obligation where his expertise and credibility would naturally prevail. Elena sat quietly at the defendant's table beside her attorney, Catherine Morrison, a woman whose understated appearance masked a reputation for thorough preparation and strategic brilliance in complex financial litigation. Elena had chosen Morrison specifically for her expertise in cases involving concealed assets and sophisticated investment portfolios, though Marcus remained unaware of this particular specialization. Judge Reyes called the proceedings to order and invited Blackstone to present his opening arguments. The attorney rose with practiced confidence, addressing the court with the authoritative tone that had served him well in countless similar cases involving wealthy professionals and their financially dependent spouses. Your Honor, this case presents a straightforward division of assets earned during an 8-year marriage where Dr. Marcus Chun served as the sole financial provider while his wife Elena pursued volunteer activities and personal hobbies. Dr. Chin's medical practice has generated the entirety of the couple's income, funding their lifestyle and accumulating the assets we seek to divide equitably. Marcus nodded approvingly as his attorney outlined what he considered an accurate representation of their marital dynamic. He had provided Blackstone with detailed financial records from his medical practice, their joint bank accounts, and the various investments he believed constituted their complete financial portfolio. In his mind, the mathematics of their divorce were simple. He had earned everything. Elena had contributed domestic support, and the court would recognize this fundamental reality. Judge Reyes listened with the neutral expression that marked experienced family court judges, though she occasionally glanced at the financial disclosure documents with what appeared to be professional curiosity. When Blackstone completed his opening statement, she invited Catherine Morrison to present Elena's position. Morrison rose with deliberate calm, her approach noticeably different from the commanding presence Blackstone had displayed. Your Honor, while we appreciate opposing counsel's characterization of this marriage, we believe the financial evidence will reveal a significantly more complex picture regarding the sources and management of the couple's wealth. Mrs. Chin's contributions to this marriage extend far beyond the domestic support role that Dr. Chun has described. Marcus felt a flicker of irritation at what he considered Elena's attorney's misguided attempt to inflate his wife's importance to their financial success. He had anticipated that Elena might try to claim credit for household management or emotional support, typical strategies in divorce proceedings where dependent spouses sought larger settlements than their contributions warranted. Judge Reyes called Dr. Chun to testify first, and he approached the witness stand with the same confident bearing that had served him well throughout his medical career. After being sworn in, Blackstone began the direct examination designed to establish Marcus as the primary financial contributor to the marriage. Dr. Chun, please describe your professional background and current position at Pacific General Hospital. Marcus straightened in the witness chair, clearly in his element when discussing his medical achievements. I am the Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Pacific General, a position I have held for 4 years. I completed my medical degree at Stanford, followed by residency training at Johns Hopkins and specialized fellowship training in advanced cardiac procedures. My practice generates approximately $800,000 annually, and I am recognized as one of the leading cardiac surgeons on the West Coast. The testimony continued with Marcus detailing his professional accomplishments, the financial growth of his practice, and his role in accumulating what he considered their marital assets. He spoke with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being recognized as an expert in his field, and his answers painted a clear picture of a highly successful medical professional who had built substantial wealth through his specialized skills. Dr. Chun, during your marriage to Elena, what has been her role in your household's financial affairs? Marcus glanced briefly at Elena before answering, his expression showing the patient tolerance one might display when discussing a well-meaning but limited person. Elena has focused primarily on domestic responsibilities and volunteer work at the hospital where I practice. She has never held a paying job during our marriage and has not contributed directly to our income generation. She enjoys working on her computer at home, but these activities are essentially hobby projects rather than serious business endeavors. Judge Reyes made notes while Marcus testified, though her expression suggested she found his characterization worth examining more closely. Dr. Chun, are you familiar with the specific nature of your wife's computer activities? Marcus shrugged slightly, maintaining his confident demeanor. She spends considerable time looking at financial websites and creating spreadsheets, but it appears to be more of an intellectual curiosity than actual business involvement. She occasionally discusses investment theories or market trends, but it is clear that she lacks the professional experience necessary to understand these concepts at a meaningful level. When Blackstone completed his direct examination, Catherine Morrison rose for cross-examination with the measured approach that had made her reputation in complex financial litigation. Dr. Chun, you testified that you are familiar with your wife's computer activities. How much time would you estimate Mrs. Chun spends on these projects each day? Marcus considered the question, remembering Elena's long hours at her home computer setup. She typically works at her computer for 6 to 8 hours daily, sometimes more. She seems to find these activities engaging, though I have never felt the need to examine her work closely since it does not generate income or affect our household finances. Morrison nodded, making careful notes before asking her next question. Dr. Chun, are you aware that your wife maintains professional relationships with individuals in the financial services industry? The question caught Marcus slightly off guard, though he maintained his confident posture. Elena occasionally receives phone calls from people discussing financial topics, but I assume these are probably representatives from investment companies trying to sell services to potential clients. Many wealthy professionals receive such solicitations regularly. Have you ever participated in these phone conversations or met any of these individuals personally? Marcus shook his head dismissively. I have more pressing professional responsibilities than listening to Elena's phone conversations about investment strategies. My focus remains on my medical practice and patient care, which generates our actual family income. Morrison continued her questioning with what appeared to be routine inquiries about Elena's activities, though Judge Reyes seemed increasingly interested in the responses. Dr. Chun, you mentioned that Mrs. Chun creates spreadsheets. Have you examined any of these documents? Not in detail. No, Marcus replied, his confidence remaining intact. Elena sometimes shows me charts and graphs she has created, but they appear to be practice exercises rather than documentation of actual financial activities. She seems to enjoy the intellectual challenge of creating complex-looking financial analyses. The cross-examination continued with Morrison asking seemingly basic questions about Elena's daily routine, her phone conversations, and her use of multiple computer monitors in their home office. Marcus answered each question with the same dismissive confidence, clearly viewing Elena's activities as elaborate time-filling exercises rather than serious business endeavors. However, as the questioning progressed, Judge Reyes began asking clarifying questions that suggested a growing interest in the discrepancies between Marcus's characterizations and some of the financial documentation before the court. Dr. Chun, I noticed that several asset disclosure forms list Mrs. Chun as the primary account holder for various investment vehicles. Can you explain how these accounts were established if your wife has never contributed financially to your marriage? Marcus paused for the first time during his testimony, clearly not expecting this line of inquiry. I assume those accounts were set up for tax purposes or perhaps represent small investments I made but placed in Elena's name for administrative convenience. I would need to review the specific documentation to provide complete details. Judge Reyes made extensive notes while Marcus attempted to explain the unexplained assets, though his answers lacked the confident specificity that had marked his earlier testimony. For the first time since the proceedings began, Marcus felt a flicker of uncertainty about his complete understanding of their financial situation. When Morrison concluded her cross-examination, she requested permission to call Elena as the next witness. As Elena rose from the defendant's table and approached the witness stand, something in her posture had changed. The quiet deference that had marked her demeanor throughout Marcus's testimony was replaced by a calm authority that caught everyone's attention, including her husband's. Mrs. Chun, Morrison began after Elena was sworn in. Please describe your educational background and professional experience prior to your marriage. Elena's response was delivered in the clear, confident voice of someone accustomed to dressing rooms full of sophisticated professionals. I completed my undergraduate degree in computer science at MIT, followed by an MBA in finance and entrepreneurship from Stanford Graduate School of Business. Before my marriage, I worked for 3 years as a technology investment analyst with Kleiner Perkins, one of Silicon Valley's premier venture capital firms. The courtroom fell completely silent as Elena's qualifications sank in. Marcus stared at his wife with an expression of complete shock, realizing for the first time that the woman he had dismissed as playing with hobby spreadsheets possessed credentials that were arguably more impressive than his own medical training. Judge Reyes leaned forward with obvious interest as Elena continued to describe her background in terms that painted a dramatically different picture than Marcus had presented. The revelation phase of their divorce proceedings was just beginning, and it was already clear that everything Marcus thought he knew about his wife's capabilities was about to be systematically demolished. Catherine Morrison moved to the evidence table with the deliberate precision of an attorney who had spent months preparing for this exact moment. She retrieved a thick folder of documents that had been carefully organized and cross-referenced, each piece of evidence designed to systematically dismantle the narrative that Dr. Chun had so confidently presented to the court. Mrs. Chun, Morrison began, addressing Elena, who remained poised in the witness chair. Could you please describe your current professional activities for the court? Elena's response was delivered with the calm authority of someone who had spent years making presentations to rooms full of venture capitalists and technology executives. For the past 8 years, I have operated as an independent technology investor and strategic advisor, specializing in early-stage artificial intelligence and biotechnology companies. My primary focus has been identifying emerging technologies with significant commercial potential and providing both capital and strategic guidance to help these companies scale effectively. Judge Reyes listened with obvious interest while making detailed notes. Dr. Chin sat frozen at the plaintiff's table, his confident expression replaced by a look of growing confusion and alarm. The woman he had dismissed as playing with hobby spreadsheets was describing a level of professional sophistication that he was struggling to reconcile with his understanding of their marriage. Morrison approached the witness stand with a document bearing the letterhead of Goldman Sachs Investment Partners. Mrs. Chun, I am showing you what has been marked as Exhibit A. Can you identify this document for the court? Elena examined the paper with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to reviewing complex financial documentation. This is a portfolio performance summary from Goldman Sachs covering my managed investments for the fiscal year ending 2023. It shows total assets under management of approximately $91 million across 14 different technology companies and venture capital positions. The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs as the magnitude of Elena's financial activities became clear. Marcus felt as though he had been punched in the stomach, the number 91 million echoing in his mind like a surgical alarm that demanded immediate attention. His medical practice, which he had proudly described as generating $800,000 annually, suddenly seemed insignificant by comparison. William Blackstone rose quickly, his confident demeanor replaced by obvious panic. Your Honor, I object to this line of questioning. We were not provided with adequate discovery regarding these alleged financial activities during the pretrial proceedings. Judge Reyes fixed Blackstone with the stern look that family court judges reserved for attorneys who appeared unprepared for their own cases. Mr. Blackstone, these documents were provided to your office 6 weeks ago as part of Mrs. Chin's comprehensive financial disclosure. If you failed to review them adequately, that represents a failure of preparation rather than inadequate discovery. Morrison continued her examination while Blackstone shuffled frantically through his files, clearly searching for documents he had apparently dismissed as irrelevant or fraudulent. Mrs. Chun, could you describe the nature of your investment strategy and the types of companies in your portfolio? Elena's explanation revealed a level of technical sophistication that left Marcus struggling to process what he was hearing. My approach focuses on identifying artificial intelligence and biotech companies that are developing breakthrough technologies with significant commercial applications. For example, I was the lead investor in Neuralink Therapeutics, which developed the brain-computer interface technology that is now licensed to major medical device manufacturers worldwide. She paused to reference another document from her portfolio. I also provided seed funding and strategic guidance to Quantum Diagnostics, the company that created the rapid cancer detection platform now used in hospitals across Europe and Asia. Their IPO last year generated returns of approximately 4,000% on my initial investment. Marcus listened to Elena's testimony with growing disbelief, recognizing some of the company names from medical journals and technology conferences he had attended. These were not obscure startup companies playing with experimental ideas. These were legitimate, successful businesses that had revolutionized entire industries, and his wife was claiming credit for identifying and funding their development. Morrison presented another exhibit, this one bearing the letterhead of the Stanford Technology Ventures program. Mrs. Chun, can you explain your relationship with Stanford University's venture capital initiatives? Elena's response revealed yet another dimension of her professional life that Marcus had never suspected. For the past 5 years, I have served as a guest lecturer and strategic advisor for Stanford's graduate entrepreneurship program. I teach a seminar called Advanced Technology Investment Analysis, where I help MBA students understand how to evaluate early-stage companies with disruptive potential. The revelation that Elena was teaching graduate-level courses at one of the nation's most prestigious business schools hit Marcus like a physical blow. She had been leaving their house several times each month, claiming to attend various appointments and meetings. He had assumed these were social activities or perhaps additional volunteer commitments, never imagining that she was teaching future business leaders at Stanford. Morrison continued presenting evidence with methodical precision, each document revealing another layer of Elena's sophisticated business activities. She showed the court correspondence from technology executives seeking Elena's investment participation, board meeting minutes where Elena provided strategic guidance for major corporate decisions, and financial statements documenting her ownership stakes in companies that Marcus recognized from news reports about Silicon Valley success stories. Mrs. Chun, Morrison asked, holding a document from TechCrunch, the prominent technology publication, I am showing you what has been marked as Exhibit G. Can you identify this article for the court? Elena glanced at the publication with what appeared to be slight embarrassment. This is a profile article that TechCrunch published last year titled The Invisible Investor: How Elena Chun Became Silicon Valley's Most Influential Anonymous Backer. The article discusses my investment philosophy and track record, though I typically prefer to avoid public attention for my work. Marcus stared at his wife as though seeing her for the first time. The woman he had patronized for 8 years, dismissing her computer work as elaborate time-wasting, had been featured in one of the technology industry's most respected publications as one of Silicon Valley's most successful investors. The cognitive dissonance was so complete that he found himself wondering if he was experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Morrison approached Elena with another set of documents, these bearing the letterheads of various law firms and corporate entities. Mrs. Chun, could you describe your involvement in the recent merger between Biogenesis Corporation and Advanced Neural Systems? Elena's answer revealed the scope of her influence in ways that left the courtroom completely silent. I served as the primary strategic advisor for that merger, which created one of the world's largest biotechnology research companies. My firms owned significant equity positions in both companies, and the merger negotiations required extensive coordination between multiple venture capital groups and institutional investors. The combined entity is now valued at approximately $12 billion. Judge Reyes stopped taking notes and looked directly at Elena with obvious fascination. Mrs. Chun, help me understand how you have managed to maintain these extensive business activities while your husband remained unaware of their scope and significance. Elena's response was delivered with the calm dignity that had marked her testimony throughout the proceedings. Your Honor, I have always conducted my professional work from our home office during regular business hours. Dr. Chin's medical practice requires his attention for 12 to 14 hours daily, and he has repeatedly expressed his preference that I not burden him with details about my computer activities. I respected his request for professional separation and focused on supporting his important surgical work while managing my business responsibilities independently. The explanation landed like a surgical blade, precise and devastating in its implications. Marcus had spent years dismissing Elena's work as unimportant, never bothering to investigate or understand what she was actually doing. His own professional arrogance had blinded him to the reality that his wife was operating at a level of business sophistication that far exceeded his own understanding of complex financial markets. Morrison presented one final exhibit, a letter bearing the seal of the President of the United States. Mrs. Chun, can you explain this correspondence for the court? Elena examined the document with the same calm professionalism she had displayed throughout her testimony. This is an invitation to serve on the National Advisory Council for Technology and Innovation, a position that involves providing strategic guidance to the federal government regarding emerging technology policies and their economic implications. The appointment would require quarterly meetings in Washington and participation in various policy development initiatives. The revelation that Elena had been invited to advise the federal government on technology policy represented the final blow to Marcus's understanding of his wife's professional standing. While he had been performing surgeries and attending medical conferences, Elena had been operating at a level of business and policy influence that commanded respect from the highest levels of government and industry. As Morrison concluded her presentation of evidence, the courtroom remained unusually quiet. Judge Reyes reviewed her extensive notes while Marcus sat in stunned silence, his confident assumptions about their marriage completely shattered. The woman he had characterized as financially dependent and intellectually limited had just demonstrated a level of professional achievement that rendered his own medical success, impressive though it was, relatively modest by comparison. Elena remained poised in the witness chair, her calm demeanor unchanged despite having just revealed a business empire that dwarfed anything Marcus had imagined possible. The systematic destruction of his assumptions was complete, though the full implications of these revelations were only beginning to become clear. Catherine Morrison moved to a different section of her evidence table, retrieving a folder marked with red tabs that indicated documents of particular significance to the case. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted dramatically since Elena's initial testimony began, with even the court reporter appearing more alert as the scope of the financial revelations continued to unfold. Mrs. Chun, Morrison continued, I would like to focus now on the specific composition of your investment portfolio. Could you describe your major holdings for the court? Elena consulted a leather-bound portfolio that she had brought to the witness stand, the same expensive portfolio that Marcus had noticed but dismissed during their hospital encounters. My current portfolio consists of controlling or significant equity positions in 23 technology companies, 12 biotech firms, 8 artificial intelligence startups, and 6 established Silicon Valley corporations. The combined current market valuation is approximately $93 million, though this fluctuates based on market conditions and private company valuations. Judge Reyes looked up from her notes with obvious interest in the specific details. Mrs. Chun, could you provide some examples of your major holdings? Elena's response revealed investments that left Marcus struggling to comprehend the magnitude of her business activities. I own 18% of Autonomous Dynamics, the self-driving vehicle company that recently signed the largest government contract in transportation history. My initial investment of $2 million 7 years ago is now valued at approximately $14 million based on their most recent funding round. She continued with systematic precision, describing holdings that read like a catalog of Silicon Valley's most successful companies. I hold significant positions in 3 companies that have achieved unicorn status, meaning private valuations exceeding $1 billion. These include Neural Path Technologies, which developed the brain-computer interface systems now used in treating paralysis patients, and Quantum Computing Solutions, which created the encryption protocols that secure most major banking systems worldwide. Marcus felt increasingly disoriented as Elena described investments in companies whose technologies he recognized from medical journals and technology conferences. These were not speculative startups playing with experimental ideas. These were legitimate, successful businesses that had fundamentally changed entire industries, and his wife had been their primary financial backer during their early development phases. Morrison approached the witness stand with another set of documents, these bearing the letterheads of major financial institutions. Mrs. Chun, I am showing you what has been marked as Exhibit M. Can you identify these documents for the court? Elena examined the papers with the professional efficiency that had marked her testimony throughout the proceedings. These are account statements from Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management documenting my liquid investment portfolio. The statements show approximately $27 million in publicly traded securities, including significant positions in Apple, Google, Tesla, and Microsoft, as well as various technology-focused mutual funds and hedge funds. The revelation that Elena maintained a $27 million liquid portfolio in addition to her private company investments left the courtroom in stunned silence. Marcus stared at his wife with complete bewilderment, realizing that the woman he had characterized as financially dependent possessed wealth that exceeded anything he had imagined possible for someone outside of Forbes magazine profiles. Morrison continued her methodical presentation of evidence, each document revealing another layer of Elena's sophisticated financial activities. Mrs. Chun, could you describe how you initially accumulated the capital necessary to make these substantial investments? Elena's answer would soon reveal the most shocking aspect of their financial relationship. I began my investment activities using the proceeds from the sale of a software company that I co-founded during my final year at Stanford Business School. The company developed predictive analytics software for healthcare systems, and we sold it to IBM for $47 million 3 months before Marcus and I were married. Marcus felt as though the courtroom had begun spinning around him as the implications of Elena's statement became clear. She had entered their marriage with $47 million in capital, a fact that completely reversed every assumption he had made about their financial dynamic. While he had believed himself to be the sole provider supporting a dependent spouse, Elena had actually brought substantial wealth to their relationship from the beginning. Morrison moved to the most damaging evidence in her collection, a folder containing documents that would shatter Marcus's understanding of his own professional success. Mrs. Chun, I want to discuss the financing of Dr. Chen's medical education and practice establishment. Could you explain your role in these expenses? Elena's response was delivered with the same calm professionalism that had marked her entire testimony, though the content would prove devastating to Marcus's credibility. When Marcus was accepted to Stanford Medical School, his family was unable to provide the necessary financial support for his education. I provided a private educational loan of $450,000 to cover his tuition, living expenses, and medical equipment costs throughout his 4 years of study. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow, though Elena continued her explanation with methodical precision. Upon completion of his residency training, Dr. Chun required additional capital to establish his private practice and purchase the specialized equipment necessary for cardiac surgery. I provided an additional investment of $800,000 to fund his practice startup, including the advanced surgical equipment, office space, and initial operating capital. Judge Reyes leaned forward with obvious fascination as the true financial foundation of Marcus's medical career became clear. Mrs. Chun, are you telling this court that you financed both Dr. Chen's medical education and the establishment of his surgical practice? Yes, Your Honor, Elena replied with quiet dignity. The total investment in Marcus's medical career was approximately $1.2 million, which I provided as private loans with below-market interest rates to support his professional development. The loan documents include standard repayment terms, though I have never enforced collection of the outstanding principal or accrued interest. Marcus sat in stunned silence as the foundation of his professional identity crumbled around him. The surgical practice that he had proudly described as his personal achievement had been built entirely with Elena's capital. The medical degree that formed the basis of his professional credibility had been purchased with Elena's money. Everything he had characterized as his independent success was actually the result of Elena's financial support and investment. Morrison presented the loan documentation to the court, showing detailed records of Elena's payments for Marcus's medical school tuition, his residency expenses, and the startup costs for his surgical practice. The papers bore Elena's signature as the lender and Marcus's signature acknowledging his debt obligations, though it was clear from the repayment schedule that Marcus had never made a single payment toward the principal or accumulated interest. Mrs. Chun, Morrison asked, what is the current outstanding balance on these educational and practice loans? Elena consulted her financial records with the efficiency of someone accustomed to tracking complex loan portfolios. Including accumulated interest at the agreed-upon rate of 5% annually, the current outstanding balance is approximately $2.1 million. This amount represents Dr. Chen's educational debt plus the practice startup investment, along with 14 years of accumulated interest. The revelation that Marcus owed Elena over $2 million for his own medical career represented the complete reversal of their financial relationship. While Marcus had characterized Elena as his financial dependent, the reality was that his entire professional existence had been built on her capital and remained subject to her continued financial support. Morrison approached the witness stand with one final devastating piece of evidence. "Mrs. Chun, I am showing you what has been marked as Exhibit R. Can you identify this document?" Elena examined the paper with the calm authority that had marked her testimony throughout the proceedings. "This is the deed of trust for our Pacific Heights residence. The property was purchased entirely with funds from my investment portfolio, and the deed lists me as the sole owner. The property is currently valued at approximately $2.8 million. The final revelation left Marcus completely speechless. Even the house where they lived, the prestigious Pacific Heights address that he had assumed represented the fruits of his medical success, actually belonged entirely to Elena. His confident characterization of Elena as his financial dependent was not merely wrong, it was the complete opposite of their actual relationship. As Morrison concluded her examination of Elena, the systematic destruction of Marcus's assumptions was complete. The woman he had dismissed as playing with hobby spreadsheets had revealed herself to be a sophisticated investor with a $93 million portfolio who had financed every aspect of his professional success. The quiet supporter he had patronized for 8 years was actually the financial foundation upon which his entire career had been built. Elena stepped down from the witness stand with the same calm dignity she had displayed throughout the proceedings, though her transformation from dismissed wife to commanding business leader was now complete and undeniable to everyone in the courtroom, especially her stunned husband. Judge Patricia Reyes reviewed her extensive notes from the proceedings with the methodical care that had earned her reputation as one of San Francisco's most respected family court judges. The revelation of Elena Chen's true financial position had transformed what appeared to be a routine divorce settlement into one of the most complex asset division cases she had encountered in 23 years on the bench. The courtroom remained unusually quiet as Judge Reyes prepared to deliver her ruling. Marcus Chun sat at the plaintiff's table in stunned silence, his confident demeanor replaced by the hollow expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had been systematically demolished. His attorney William Blackstone appeared equally shaken, shuffling through documents that he now realized had contained evidence he had completely failed to understand or investigate properly. Elena maintained her composed bearing at the defendant's table, though there was something in her posture that suggested a person who had spent years preparing for this exact moment. Her attorney Catherine Morrison organized her files with quiet satisfaction, knowing that her methodical presentation of evidence had achieved everything they had hoped to accomplish. "Your Honor," began Judge Reyes, addressing the courtroom with the formal authority that marked significant legal proceedings. "This case has presented some of the most striking disparities between claimed and actual financial contributions that this court has encountered. Based on the evidence presented, I am prepared to issue my ruling on the division of marital assets." She paused to reference her notes before continuing with the systematic precision that would reshape both parties' futures. First, regarding the characterization of Mrs. Chen's professional activities that Dr. Chun described as hobby projects, the evidence clearly establishes that Mrs. Elena Chen operates as a sophisticated technology investor with a portfolio valued at approximately $93 million. This represents legitimate business assets that she accumulated through her professional expertise and strategic investment decisions. Marcus felt each word like a surgical incision, precise and irreversible in its implications. The hobby projects he had dismissed for 8 years represented wealth that exceeded his most ambitious professional dreams by orders of magnitude. Judge Reyes continued her ruling with methodical attention to the financial realities that the evidence had revealed. Second, regarding the claims of Dr. Chun serving as the sole financial provider for this marriage, the evidence demonstrates that Mrs. Chun provided approximately $1.2 million to finance Dr. Chen's medical education and practice establishment. These funds were provided as documented loans that remain outstanding with accumulated interest totaling over $2.1 million. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom with devastating clarity, establishing a debt relationship that completely reversed Marcus's characterization of their financial dynamic. William Blackstone attempted to interject with an objection, But Judge Reyes silenced him with a look that suggested she had little patience for attorneys who failed to prepare adequately for their own cases. Third, Judge Reyes continued, regarding the Pacific Heights residence valued at $2.8 million, the evidence clearly establishes Mrs. Chun as the sole owner of this property, having purchased it entirely with funds from her investment portfolio. Dr. Chun has no ownership interest in the marital residence. Elena listened to the judge's ruling with calm satisfaction, though she maintained the dignified bearing that had characterized her testimony throughout the proceedings. Years of careful financial documentation and meticulous record-keeping had provided the evidence necessary to establish the true nature of their relationship, despite Marcus's confident assumptions about her limitations. Judge Reyes addressed the most significant aspect of her ruling with particular emphasis. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds that Dr. Chin's medical practice, while professionally successful, was established entirely through Mrs. Chin's financial backing and remains subject to her outstanding loan obligations. The practice generates approximately $800,000 annually, but operates under a debt burden of over $2.1 million to Mrs. Chun. The implications of the judge's finding were staggering in their scope. Marcus's surgical practice, which he had proudly characterized as his independent professional achievement, was actually a business operating under massive debt to his wife. Every surgery he performed, every patient he treated, every dollar of income he generated was technically being produced by a practice that belonged, in economic reality, to Elena. Therefore, Judge Reyes concluded, this court awards to Mrs. Chun full ownership and control of the investment portfolio, the Pacific Heights residence, and ongoing authority over the financial obligations related to Dr. Chin's medical practice. Dr. Chun will retain operational control of his practice provided that he maintains current loan payments and operates within the financial parameters established by Mrs. Chun as the primary creditor. Marcus felt as though he had been professionally and personally eviscerated with surgical precision. The woman he had patronized for 8 years had just been awarded control over everything he had believed he owned, including the practice that formed the foundation of his professional identity. Judge Reyes addressed Elena directly with obvious respect for her documented business acumen. Mrs. Chun, given your expertise in managing complex financial portfolios, do you wish to establish specific terms for Dr. Chin's continued operation of his medical practice? Elena rose to address the court with the calm authority that had marked her testimony throughout the proceedings. Your Honor, I have no desire to interfere with Dr. Chin's important medical work or his ability to serve his patients effectively. However, I do believe it would be appropriate to establish a formal repayment schedule for the outstanding educational and practice loans, along with clear financial reporting requirements to ensure the practice operates sustainably. Her response was delivered with gracious professionalism, though the underlying message was unmistakable. Marcus would continue his surgical career, but only under Elena's financial oversight and within parameters that she would establish. The confident dismissal he had shown toward her business capabilities was now replaced by his complete dependence on her financial support and continued goodwill. The judge concluded her ruling by ordering both parties to work with a court-appointed financial mediator to establish the specific terms of Marcus's debt repayment and practice operation. Elena would maintain control of her investment portfolio and residence, while Marcus would essentially become a debtor working to repay the woman he had characterized as his financial dependent. As the court session concluded, Marcus sat in stunned silence while Elena gathered her documents with practiced efficiency. The systematic reversal of their power dynamic was complete, though the personal implications were only beginning to become clear. Word of the dramatic court proceedings spread quickly through San Francisco's medical community, particularly among the staff at Pacific General Hospital, where both Marcus and Elena were well-known figures. The revelation that the quiet woman who had served refreshments in the break room was actually one of Silicon Valley's most successful investors sent shockwaves through the hospital's social hierarchy. Dr. Rebecca Walsh approached Elena in the hospital parking lot 3 days after the court ruling, her expression mixing professional respect with obvious embarrassment about the staff's previous treatment of Elena. Mrs. Chun, I wanted to apologize for not recognizing your professional accomplishments during all the time you spent volunteering here. We clearly failed to understand who we were working with. Elena responded with the same gracious dignity that had marked her court testimony. Dr. Walsh, I never felt the need to discuss my business activities in the hospital setting. I was here to support the important medical work that everyone performs, and that support was genuine regardless of my other professional responsibilities. The conversation represented a fundamental shift in how Elena was perceived within the medical community. Staff members who had previously seen her as Marcus's supportive wife now recognized her as a sophisticated business leader whose investment activities had likely contributed to medical technology advances they used daily in their practice. Marcus attempted to continue his surgical schedule as though nothing had changed, but the reality of his altered circumstances was impossible to ignore. His colleagues treated him with the careful politeness typically reserved for people whose professional circumstances had become awkward or embarrassing. Everyone knew that his practice operated under Elena's financial oversight, and this knowledge colored every interaction with the man who had previously commanded unquestioned professional respect. Elena began the process of restructuring her investment portfolio to account for her changed personal circumstances. She scheduled meetings with her financial advisors to optimize her holdings and explore new investment opportunities that aligned with her long-term strategic goals. Her calm efficiency in managing the transition impressed even the sophisticated financial professionals who had worked with her for years. During one such meeting with her portfolio manager at Goldman Sachs, Elena discussed her plans for continued technology investment and her interest in expanding her biotech holdings. The conversation was conducted with the same professional sophistication that had characterized her business relationships throughout her marriage, though now she operated without the need to manage Marcus's misconceptions about her activities. Marcus, meanwhile, struggled to adapt to his new reality as someone whose professional existence depended entirely on Elena's continued support. He attempted to maintain his previous confident bearing, but his colleagues noticed a fundamental change in his demeanor. The man who had once boasted about supporting a dependent wife now worked under the financial oversight of the woman he had systematically underestimated for 8 years. 6 months after the divorce proceedings, Elena's investment portfolio had grown to over $100 million, driven by successful exits from 2 artificial intelligence companies and a significant increase in her biotech holdings. She continued her teaching responsibilities at Stanford and accepted the position on the National Advisory Council for Technology and Innovation, expanding her influence in both academic and policy circles. Marcus maintained his surgical practice, though under the financial reporting requirements that Elena had established through the court-mediated agreement. His monthly reports to Elena's accounting firm served as constant reminders of his professional dependence on the woman he had dismissed as intellectually limited. The irony was not lost on his medical colleagues, who observed his transformation from dismissive husband to subordinate debtor with mixture of fascination and discomfort. The broader implications of their story resonated throughout San Francisco's professional community, becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of making assumptions about others' capabilities based on limited observation or gender stereotypes. Elena's gracious handling of her victory earned her additional respect, while Marcus's previous dismissiveness became a source of professional embarrassment that followed him throughout his medical career. Elena eventually relocated her primary residence to a larger property in Palo Alto, closer to her Stanford teaching responsibilities and the Silicon Valley companies in her investment portfolio. The Pacific Heights house became one of several properties in her real estate holdings, managed as part of her diversified investment strategy. Marcus remained in a smaller apartment in the city, working diligently to meet his loan repayment obligations while rebuilding his professional reputation from the damage caused by his public underestimation of Elena's capabilities. His surgical skills remained excellent, but his personal credibility within the medical community never fully recovered from the revelation of his spectacular misjudgment. The story of Elena and Marcus Chun became a defining example of how assumptions about others' capabilities can blind us to remarkable achievements happening right in front of us. Elena's quiet competence had built an empire, while Marcus focused on his own perceived importance, and the ultimate revelation of that truth delivered justice in the most poetic way possible. As you reflect on this story, you might recognize similar situations in your own experience, where someone's true capabilities were hidden or underestimated by those around them. Whether in professional settings, family dynamics, or social relationships, we all encounter people whose quiet competence masks extraordinary achievements. Share in the comments if you have witnessed moments when someone's real abilities were finally revealed, transforming how everyone around them understood their true worth and contributions. The transformation of Elena from dismissed wife to recognized business leader serves as a powerful reminder that the most significant work often happens where others are not paying attention, and that true justice sometimes comes through the simple revelation of truth that has been hidden in plain sight all along.